In this video, we're going to look at how to solve what I call a basic nonlinear equation. While these equations are not linear, we can still use a lot of the same tools that we use to solve a linear equation in order to solve these equations. So let's take a look at our first example. It'll be 4x squared plus 3 equals 19. And again, this is not a linear equation because it includes that x squared term, and a linear equation would not have a term like that. So the first step in solving a nonlinear equation or a basic nonlinear equation like this is to isolate or solve for the nonlinear term. In this case, that is the x squared term. So we want to get that x squared by itself. And for this problem, that means we need to subtract 3 from both sides. So we'll get 4x squared equals 19 minus 3, which is 16. And then we can divide both sides by 4. So we get x squared equals 4. From here, we need to sort of undo the nonlinear piece. And this particular step will be different depending on sort of what nonlinear function we are working with or nonlinear term we are working with. When we've got an x squared or a squared term, the way we undo that, so we undo, I'll put this in quotes, it's not really a formal math term, but it's a term I like to use. So we undo the nonlinear term. And so when we have an x squared, in order to, quote, undo that, we need to take a square root of both sides. So we'll have the square root of x squared equals the square root of 4. And the reason that this helps is because when we take the square root of a squared term, we are left with just what's on the inside of that. Now, taking a square root to undo a square term is sort of a special operation that involves something that we always have to keep in mind, and that is we will potentially have two possible solutions whenever we do this. Namely, we will have a positive as well as a negative solution. That is because when you square a positive number, you get the same thing as you would get if you squared the sort of negative version of that number. And so whenever we take a square root to undo a squared term, we need to do a plus or a minus. And what's left here, the square root of x squared, we're just left with an x on the left side. On the right-hand side, we've got sort of our two solutions. So we've got plus or minus the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is a number we might know as 2, since 2 times 2 is 4. And so we actually have two solutions here. We have x equals positive 2 and x equals negative 2. Now, when solving any equations, you can always plug your work back into the original equation, plug your answers, I should say, back into the original equation and check if you're right. I'm not going to do that every single time here, but it is a good way to check your work when you're solving equations. In the next videos, we will look at more types of examples, but this was just our first example of solving a basic nonlinear equation.